The carbon coach. We've changed the agenda slightly. Originally, Steve Downing from Henley Business College was due to be presenting, but unfortunately he had to pull out last week at the 11th hour, so David is replacing him. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm Dave. And ethics is one of my specialities. It's the county I came from. There's a few other comparisons with Chris's talk. I'm also a part-time eco-warrior, and those of you looking side-on, I'm slightly overweight, but hopefully I'm not a slob. I don't drive a white van either. Okay, this is going to be tremendous value, and I'm going to enjoy it, whether you do or not. So it's a 40-minute talk, and I'm going to get through it in 20. That's my target. Our deepest fear. How many of you know the Marianne Williamson? Yeah, not that many. Well, I'll treat you to it at the end. My deepest fear, having PowerPoint unplugged on my presentation. That wasn't very deep, was it? And then beyond that, having someone twittering about how awful my talk was while I'm talking. But what if our deepest fear here today, right now, is actually that we don't believe it ourselves? People have been talking about who we trust and belief. Do we actually believe that we've got something that's sustainable to communicate? Do we believe we're sustainable? Do we believe we can be sustained by the universe? Or you could get spiritual on this. And you've heard the one about your actions. So my favourite T-shirt, you can buy one off me later. You can't really. Job vacancy, save the world, apply within. And that's what I tried to make my life about 5 years ago when I rebranded myself. I'm an engineer. I'm not one of you. So I'm the token thick bloke today. Except actually engineers are brilliant, of course. So I'll stick up for myself. Apollo 13. Any of you seen Tom Hanks, the movie? When they get them back safely to Earth, it's a fantastic metaphor of life and our species at this point in time. The famous quote, "Failure is not an option." And they did bring them back against all odds. How they did it was by pulling the plug on all the systems that they didn't need, by tearing up the manual, and actually they used the plastic cover from the manual to make a funnel. But the point was they kind of made it up as they went along, and they got people home. And Houston, we do have a problem, and I wouldn't call myself a carbon coach if I didn't think that CO2 was a really big problem. Has anyone seen any CO2, by the way? You may have seen this one before, but this is my portable marketing aid, and it also helps me breathe, which helps me relax. It turns purple if I've been drinking. If I stop about there, I kind of live and breathe CO2, but I don't breathe pure CO2, as you probably know. But if I did, that would be 10 grams of CO2. And you're going to hear from a great speaker later on this afternoon about internal carbon trading. The average lifestyle of one of us, if we're average, I know you're not, you're special. The average lifestyle of one of us is 100 of those every hour. So there's 100 people now, so that's 10,000 of those every hour we're here today. Open the doors at the end, that's a lot of CO2 going into the sky. And it is a great turning. Failure isn't an option. Why? Because I've got some of these little things. Chris mentioned them. You know, the little ones. They used to live under a nuclear cloud. Now they're living under a carbon shadow. And I want to take that weight off my daughter's back. That's as preachy and self-righteous as I will get today, if I can do it. The talk I thought I was standing in for was Chantal. So I was going to, Chantal Cook, Passion for the Planet, I was going to plug her and say how wonderful she is. I think Passion for the Planet is probably the best radio station in the world, thanks to Heineken. 10 years ago at parties, when I was still invited to parties, I used to go and say, "Hi, I'm Dave Hampton, I'm 9 tons, which was my carbon footprint at that point in time. In the write-up, you may have seen that I do stand up with a difference. Just hold that thought briefly. But how many of you have a rough idea what your carbon footprint is of your life at home at this point in time? Blimey, that is so much better than the normal audiences. Right, well, I'm going to do stand up with a difference. Would you all please stand up, those who roughly know your... No, just those who roughly know their footprint. And I'd like you all to give them a fantastic round of applause for knowing... Thank you. You can sit down. Thank you so much for, there you say, I do stand up, so for knowing your footprint, for knowing how much pollution you're producing. I think that's quite important. Isn't it a bit like knowing your bank balance or knowing, you know, how many kids you've got? Maybe not. And as it's kind of football World Cup time, you know, what if we could be as xenophobic about our planet? And listening to Chris, no one cares about the planet, we only care about people or ourselves. But what if we did care about the planet? You know, it is our home, and we've only got one. And there's a wonderful piece of footage. Any of you seen Jan Arthur Bertrand's Home movie? Absolutely incredible. And you don't really have to think very much, just watch it flying over the mountains where they used to be before we took the tops off them, and the forests before we burnt them, and it kind of gives you something. So there's a few other categories you could probably throw at me after Chris's talk. Maybe this is the evangelist, what was it, the ethical evangelist, but how about that? You can read it for yourself. But the nice little twist about me, if you're into acronyms, is you can turn that into aging hippie, if you try. That's roughly what it stands for. So I'm a home-loving guy. I love my home, which is planet Earth. I've got lots of things that create lots of carbon paw prints. 3 cars you might pick up on. That's very inauthentic. Here's where I live. Unfortunately, 7 billion other people live there too. But it's rather nice, don't you think? It's a lovely place. It isn't really where I live. That's my house, slightly more ordinary. I do create carbon on a bad day. And this main theme of my talk, I think, today is just the drip, 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 the drip in the ocean effect. Drips can be drips of pollution, and if they are, then the more we drip, the more pollution on a finite planet. It doesn't go away. So you put a drip of ink in a glass of water, sooner or later it will become inky water. And we kind of forgot that one. Or it could be drips of solution. You could be putting stuff in that, or not putting stuff in, less purple balloons, and we start to create a solution. And any of you with kids will know the drip, drip, drip effects. I almost said wives, but the drip, drip, drip effect is very powerful. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pass these around. Anyone that wants a purple balloon, please take one. If you want to blow it up at the end of the presentation and throw them all in the air, then that will be fine, as long as you collect your own waste afterwards. BP has been talked about a lot today, as you might have thought. But it's the same analogy, really, of drops in the ocean. BP are on record as saying, you know, don't worry about the oil spill, it's a drop in the ocean. Well, it's a big drop, a big ocean. And I get a bit bored with all of those long words. I prefer words like, here today, you do too, creativity, clarity, it's been mentioned a few times, sanity. And what about humanity? You know, what about us being real people and not consumers and all this stuff? Oops, put another 5 billion of those into the atmosphere in the last minute as a species. Nature can absorb less than half, so they're building up. I think Nelson, on his top of his column, had a blind eye, didn't he? He said, I see no ships. And those balloons were used to good effect at the climate march about 3 years ago, allegedly, but obviously I'm not an activist, so I wouldn't go to stuff like that. Invisible bonfires is a wonderful, if you Google it, there's a nice little video about invisible bonfires, and it tells us about the fact we know we're actually quite ashamed about burning fossil, because we hide it up. So we put it inside power stations or internal combustion engines or jet engines, but we, generally speaking, we hide it. We don't actually celebrate the bonfire itself. If we did, we'd see we were burning the planet, BP. But the other half of that is the invisible smoke. We don't see the product side of it. We see the waste and the peak oil going in, and we don't see the smoke. So in a world that is very heavily purple at the moment, it's quite hard to see the green bits. This is part of my proposition, really, is that, you know, we're in the city, everything's purple all around us, and we're talking about green. I had an objection with LOHAS this morning, and I'm going to be a bit cheeky. I don't know if the speaker's still here, it doesn't really matter. But it's just, for me, it sounded like a lot of words, and it was a LOHAS consumer. So I came up with MYAS, which is, of course, my ass, and to prove it, I have a little text message from a neighbour, if I can get the right one. This isn't a neighbour, this is a social network. Any of you live in a nice place? I live in a fairly nice place, but someone posted this on our sales and wants board. Advice wanted, I need a new car for the nanny for the school run. Hummer preferred to keep us safe. Powerful aircon a must to keep the kids cool. Company will pay, so running costs don't matter. Also needed large patio heater. Don't want the kids getting a chill on cold summer evenings. Aircon needed also for summer days. New boiler needed, as we've got a big unused conservatory extension which gets very cold in the winter. Any tips on cheap flights? We need to get some regular US skiing trips in. Most